The main purpose of the passage is to what? All right, I've covered up the choices because I want to do a process called rip-wrap. I'm going to write that down real quick. Rip-wrap. And that stands for rephrase if possible and read around and predict. And I really want to focus on the rephrasing and the prediction. This is a technique that I like to use to help me make sense of questions and rephrase them in my own words so that I have power over them. It makes it easier for me to understand. So first I'm going to rephrase. So the main purpose of this passage is to what? And we can flip that around and ask the question like, what was the author trying to accomplish? Let's try that. What was the author's goal? I'll just write that. Author's goal. And we really lucked out on this passage because it kind of gives it away in the title, right? Because it's asking the question, can economics be ethical? Right? We're very fortunate in that regard. My prediction is going to be that the main purpose of the passage is to try to answer the question, can economics be ethical? When I did my active read of the passage, I learned about the 3 different competing ideas that the author brings up. And so now let's expose the choices and see what we're working with. My prediction about the answer is that it's going to be related to the question of whether or not econ can be ethical. Let's look for the choices that match that prediction. Choice A, the purpose of the passage is to consider an ethical dilemma posed by cost-benefit analysis. Does that match my prediction? No. B, describe a psychology study of ethical economic behavior. Does that match my prediction? No, it does not. C, argue that the free market prohibits ethical economics. Does that match my prediction about the ways in which economics can be ethical? No, it does not. I'm going to cross that off, and that leaves us with D, examine ways of evaluating the ethics of economics. Cool. So I've made my way to the answer pretty quickly. I just want to show you the power of rip-wrap, of rephrasing the question in your mind, maybe writing it down, and then coming up with a prediction about what you expect the answer to be. So we've knocked out this question, and on test day, you would move on to the next one. But because this is a slowed down instructional video, I want to break down for you why the other choices were not correct. So we can talk about some common varieties of wrong choice that you're going to see on SAT. So looking back at choice A, why did I mark that as incorrect? Why did I cross it off? Well, I think of considering an ethical dilemma posed by cost-benefit analysis as certainly something that was mentioned in the passage. Cost-benefit analysis was mentioned in discussing Adam Smith. Right? Here we are on line 19. Whenever planners use cost-benefit analysis to justify a new rail line, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't really have anything to do with the purpose of the passage. In fact, an ethical dilemma is not posed by cost-benefit analysis in the passage. But even if it were, it wouldn't have taken up very much space in the argument. So I would call this kind of choice too narrow. It's too specific to be about the main purpose of the passage. And a great way to consider whether or not something is too narrow is to evaluate how much actual physical space that argument takes up on the page. If an ethical dilemma posed by cost-benefit analysis were a major part that consumed multiple paragraphs of the passage, then I might be like, oh, maybe that is part of the main purpose. But it's sort of a throwaway reference in one line. So we can cross it off and say that's too narrow. Choice B describes a psychology study of ethical economic behavior. I don't think this actually happens in the passage. Let's see, because the last couple of paragraphs do mention, there we are. The last paragraph talks about behavioral economists here. I'm on line 67, talking about how like psychologists and neuroscientists can help change the field of economics and make it more ethical. But a specific study is not described. So this just straight up doesn't happen in the passage, which is why I felt confident crossing it off. And then C is also too narrow. It argues that the free market prohibits ethical economics. And this is an argument that is very briefly raised, but it's not one of the 3 core philosophies that the passage is largely about. And so again, I would say this is too narrow. Choices can also be too broad. So while A and C are too narrow and specific, I can also easily imagine a choice that is too broad and too unspecific to be correct. Again, we lucked out with this question, right? It's asking a question that is itself asked in the title of the passage. But for future questions like this one, if you're trying to determine the main purpose of a passage, look to see if the idea is mentioned throughout the passage and in the intro and the conclusion. Because if it's not, it's probably too narrow.